There's a kind of exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix. Not physical exhaustion, emotional exhaustion. The kind that comes from holding on too tightly, holding on to people who already left emotionally, holding on to versions of yourself that no longer exist, holding on to expectations life never promised you. And maybe the strangest part is, most of us don't even realize we're doing it. We call it love. We call it ambition. We call it loyalty. But sometimes it's attachment. And according to Buddhism, attachment is where suffering quietly begins. Not because loving is wrong, but because we try to freeze things that were never meant to stay still. Relationships change, bodies age, success fades, feelings move, people leave. Even the version of you listening to this right now will eventually disappear. And yet the mind resists this reality constantly. Modern psychology calls it cognitive resistance. Buddhism called it suffering thousands of years ago. And honestly, maybe this is why so many people feel anxious all the time. Because deep down, we're trying to negotiate with impermanence. We want guarantees in a world that has never offered them. Tonight, I want to talk about the Buddhist art of letting go. Not as some cold spiritual idea, but as something deeply human. Because maybe peace does not come from controlling life. Maybe peace begins the moment we stop fighting its nature.
One of the most painful truths about being human is that we become attached to almost everything. Not just people, but routines, expectations, identities, memories, future fantasies. We get attached to who we think we should be, and when reality moves differently, suffering begins. Modern psychology explains this through attachment systems. The brain is constantly trying to create stability. Predictability equals safety. The unknown feels dangerous, which is why anxiety is created. But Buddhism takes this even deeper. Buddhism says suffering is not caused simply by pain. It is caused by resistance to pain, resistance to change, resistance to impermanence. Imagine holding sand in your hand. The tighter you squeeze it, the faster it slips through your fingers. That's how most people live. We grip everything tightly. Relationships, status, youth, control, validation. And eventually, life reminds us nothing can be possessed permanently. There's actually something psychologically fascinating about heartbreak. Studies show emotional rejection activates similar brain regions as physical pain, which explains why losing someone can literally feel unbearable. But what hurts even more is the story the mind creates afterward. This should not have happened. They were supposed to stay. My life was supposed to look different. And suddenly, we're not just grieving reality, we're grieving the death of expectation. Buddhism teaches that expectations often become invisible contracts with life, and life never signed those contracts. There's a famous Buddhist story called The Second Arrow. The Buddha asks, If a person is struck by an arrow, is it painful? Of course. But if they are struck by a second arrow immediately afterward, is that not even more painful? The first arrow is unavoidable pain. The second arrow is the suffering we create in the mind. Rumination, resistance, obsession, self-blame, catastrophizing. And honestly, this describes modern overthinking perfectly. Someone ignores your message. That's the first arrow. But then the mind says, maybe they hate me. Maybe I'm not enough. Maybe everyone leaves eventually. That's the second arrow. Modern psychology calls this cognitive distortion. Buddhism simply observed the same mechanism internally thousands of years ago. The mind has a tendency to multiply suffering. And the scary part is, most people believe every thought they think. But thoughts are not always truth. Sometimes they are fear wearing the mask of logic. Letting go begins with observing the mind instead of becoming it. That's why meditation exists in Buddhism. Not to become emotionless, but to create space between awareness and reaction, to realize I can feel pain without becoming consumed by it. Most anxiety is connected to control, or more specifically, the fear of losing it. People try to control outcomes constantly: conversations, relationships, careers, aging, reputation, even how others perceive them. But life keeps humbling the illusion. You can do everything right and still lose someone. You can plan carefully and still fail. You can love deeply and still experience endings. Buddhism does not say this to make people hopeless. It says this to free them, because suffering increases when we demand certainty from an uncertain world. There's an interesting concept in psychology called intolerance of uncertainty. People with high anxiety often struggle not because danger is present, but because certainty is absent. The mind would rather predict pain than sit in the unknown, which is why people obsess, replay conversations, check phones repeatedly, seek reassurance endlessly. They're trying to reduce uncertainty. But Buddhism invites a radical alternative. What if peace is not found in certainty, but in learning to remain open despite uncertainty? That changes everything. Because now life is no longer something to conquer, it becomes something to experience. There's an old story often used in Buddhist teachings. Hunters place fruit inside a narrow jar. A monkey reaches inside and grabs the fruit, but once its fist closes, it cannot remove its hand. Freedom is available instantly. The monkey simply has to let go, but it refuses, and that's the trap, not the jar, the attachment. Human beings do this constantly. We hold on to resentment, old identities, toxic relationships, ego, the need to be understood, the need to be right. Sometimes people hold on to suffering because it became familiar, and psychologically, familiarity feels safer than uncertainty, even when it hurts. That's why people return to unhealthy patterns repeatedly. The nervous system confuses familiar pain with safety. Buddhism asks us to observe this carefully, because awareness is the beginning of liberation. One of the biggest misunderstandings about Buddhism is that people think detachment means not caring. But true detachment is not coldness, it's love without control. Imagine loving someone fully while accepting they are temporary. That changes the texture of love completely. Suddenly, love becomes appreciation instead of possession, presence instead of ownership. Most suffering in relationships comes from unconscious attachment. Don't change, don't leave, keep making me feel secure. But people are not emotional insurance policies. They are human beings, constantly evolving. And honestly, one of the most painful experiences in life is realizing someone you loved deeply has changed. But maybe suffering intensifies because we keep comparing them to who they used to be. We fall in love with memory and resist reality. Buddhism gently reminds us everything alive is changing continuously, including love itself. And maybe maturity is learning how to love without trying to imprison life. Sometimes the hardest thing to release is not another person, it's yourself. Or more specifically, the version of yourself you thought you would become. People grieve unlived lives quietly. The artist who stopped creating, the relationship that never happened, the dream that faded, the younger self who imagined a different future. And social media makes this even harder now, because everyone appears to be becoming something. Constant achievement, constant transformation, constant comparison. Psychologists call this ideal self-discrepancy, the gap between who you are and who you think you should be. And the bigger the gap, the greater the shame. But Buddhism questions the entire idea of a fixed self. It asks, who exactly are you trying so hard to preserve? The child version, the successful version, the admired version? Identity itself is fluid, and maybe suffering grows when we force ourselves into rigid definitions. Sometimes healing begins when you stop demanding that your life match an old blueprint.
Maybe letting go is misunderstood. Maybe it isn't losing something. Maybe it's finally seeing reality clearly. Everything changes. Every season, every relationship, every emotion, every identity, even pain, especially pain. And strangely, there's something peaceful about accepting this fully. Because once you stop demanding permanence from life, gratitude becomes easier, presence becomes easier, love becomes softer, fear loosens its grip. You stop trying to freeze moments and start experiencing them. Maybe this is why so many Buddhist teachings feel quiet instead of dramatic. Because wisdom rarely screams. It notices, it observes, it accepts. And maybe real peace is not found by controlling life, but by learning how to move with it, like water, flexible, present, unafraid to change. If there's anything to take from this tonight, let it be this. You can love deeply without clinging. You can care fully without controlling. You can experience pain without becoming trapped inside it. And sometimes freedom begins with a single moment of release, a deep breath, an acceptance, a quiet decision to stop fighting reality. Because life was never meant to be held tightly forever. It was meant to be lived, and eventually, gently let go.